Nobody is going to tell you this. Not your parents, not your friends, not the people you work with, not the people who claim to care about you. Nobody is going to sit you down and say clearly and directly that the thing you keep doing, the chasing, the explaining, the over-investing in situations and people that have already shown you what they think of your effort, is the single most expensive habit you carry. It costs you more than any bad decision you have ever made, more than any wrong job you have ever taken, more than any relationship you have stayed in too long. Because those things happen to you. This habit is something you are doing to yourself every single day, in every significant room you walk into. And the worst part is that nobody will tell you, because the people who benefit from your chasing need you to keep doing it. And the people who love you do not know how to say it without making you feel like something is wrong with who you are. Nothing is wrong with who you are. Something is wrong with what you have been taught about how to move through a world that does not reward the things you were told it rewards. Machiavelli understood this 500 years ago. He watched men of genuine talent, genuine integrity, genuine capability exhaust themselves trying to hold on to things that were already gone, trying to convince people who had already decided, trying to earn positions they should have simply claimed. He observed, across 15 years as a diplomat of the Florentine Republic, that the men who chased were the men who were chased from. The men who explained were the men whose explanations were used as evidence against them. The men who stayed when they should have walked were the men who paid the highest price when the bill finally arrived. And the men who understood, who saw the game for what it was and moved accordingly, were the men who quietly and consistently ended up holding the things that everyone else was exhausting themselves trying to reach. This video contains 7 tricks, not theories, tricks. The kind of practical, immediately usable psychological moves that Machiavelli observed in the people who won, and that you can start applying to your own life tomorrow morning. But let me be direct with you before I start. If you watch this and do nothing with it, you will keep producing the same results you have been producing. The chasing will continue. The explaining will continue. The staying too long will continue. And the cost, the quiet, grinding, daily cost of being someone who gives more than they receive and then wonders why the imbalance never corrects itself, will continue. If you are done paying that cost, stay here. If you are not done yet, you will be. And when you are, this video will still be here waiting. If you are ready, comment the words, "I walk away now." Like this video because every like pushes it toward someone who is still chasing something that stopped being worth the effort a long time ago. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. And drop your location and the time right now. This community is real, and right now it matters who is here. Trick 1. Stop chasing people who saw you leave and did not follow. Let me tell you something that is going to sting a little. And I need you to let it sting, because the sting is the part that makes it stick. You have been chasing people who watched you walk away and did not move. You walked toward the door. You showed them, through your behavior, through your reduced availability, through the slow withdrawal of the energy you used to give freely, that you were moving in a different direction. And they watched you go. They did not stop you. They did not reach for you. They did not ask what changed or what they could do differently or what was happening inside you that made the leaving feel necessary. They watched. And then you came back. You came back because the silence was louder than you expected. Because the absence of their response felt worse than the presence of the dynamic you were trying to leave. Because somewhere deep in the wiring that governs how you relate to other people, the act of being unchased felt like a verdict about your value rather than information about theirs. Machiavelli wrote about this in a political context, but the psychology is identical in every human relationship. He observed that the ruler who retreated and then returned to the same alliance The same position, the same arrangement that had already demonstrated its inadequacy, had communicated something devastating to every observer, that his alternatives were worse than what he was returning to, that his independence was a performance rather than a reality, that his walking away could be safely ignored because history had shown he would always come back. And once that understanding was installed in the minds of the people around him, every subsequent negotiation, every subsequent interaction, every subsequent exchange of anything, respect, resources, attention, was conducted from a position that had been permanently weakened by the return. My friend, here is the correction. When you walk away from something, walk away. Not as a performance designed to generate a response, as a genuine decision about what your energy and your attention and your presence are worth. And when the silence arrives, and it will, sit in it. Do not interpret the silence. Do not construct a meaning from it that confirms the fear that you are not worth chasing. Let the silence be information, clean, unadorned, useful information about the other person's actual investment in the relationship. Because a person who lets you walk away without a word has told you everything you need to know about where you stand with them. And that information, received clearly and without self-deception, is more valuable than 10 more years of chasing would ever be. If that hit you where it was supposed to hit, let me give you a specific example so this lands where it needs to land. You have a friend, someone you have invested in for years. And over the past several months, you have noticed that the investment has been flowing in one direction. You initiate the conversations, you check in, you show up, and they receive it. Warmly, usually. Genuinely, probably. But they do not initiate. They do not reach. They do not do the specific, observable thing that would tell you, without any interpretation or guesswork, that your presence in their life matters enough to generate effort from their side. So you test it. You stop initiating. You stop reaching. You let the space open up and you wait to see what fills it. And what fills it is quiet. Days pass, weeks, nothing arrives, and the silence tells you what the friendship actually was. It was your project. It was something you were building and maintaining and funding, and the other person was occupying it comfortably without ever being asked to contribute to the construction. That truth hurts, but it is the truth. And the truth held clearly is always more useful than the comfortable lie of continued effort poured into an empty return. Comment, I do not return to what did not reach for me. Trick 2. Your explanation is not a bridge. It is a door you are holding open for someone to walk through and judge you. Before I get into this one, I need you to understand why explaining yourself feels so necessary, because the feeling is real, and the instinct behind it is not wrong. It just produces the wrong outcome in the wrong environments. You explain because you want to be understood. You want the other person to see the full picture, the context, the reasoning, the emotional landscape that produced the decision they are questioning. You believe, genuinely, that if they could see what you see, they would understand. And that belief is so strong that you keep explaining even when the explaining is clearly not working. Even when the other person's face tells you they stopped listening 2 sentences ago. Even when you can feel the explanation making things worse instead of better. You keep going because stopping feels like admitting that the gap between you and them cannot be closed. And that admission is painful in a way that most people would rather avoid by continuing to talk. Machiavelli observed something about explanation in political contexts that applies with devastating accuracy to personal and professional ones. He documented that the men who explained their decisions most thoroughly were not the men who were best understood. They were the men who were most thoroughly judged, because every explanation is an invitation. It is an invitation for the person hearing it to evaluate the reasoning, to find the weaknesses in the logic, to identify the emotional drivers behind the decision and to use those drivers as evidence of something other than what the explainer intended. The explanation that was supposed to close the gap between two people's understanding actually opens a new gap, the gap between the decision-maker's interior experience and the listener's evaluation of that experience. And that evaluation is almost never conducted with the generosity that the explainer is hoping for. Here is what you do instead. The next time you feel the pull to explain a decision you have made, a professional choice, a personal boundary, a change in direction that someone in your life is questioning, practice the discipline of the short acknowledgement, not the detailed defense, not the comprehensive walkthrough of your reasoning. The short, warm, settled sentence that acknowledges the question without opening the case file. Something like, "This is the direction I have decided to go." Not because you owe anyone less than a full explanation. Because the full explanation, in most contested situations, does not produce understanding. It produces material. And material, in the hands of someone who has already decided what they think, is a weapon that you built and handed over voluntarily. Machiavelli watched this happen to men of enormous capability who were brought low not by their bad decisions, but by their thorough explanations of their good ones. The decisions were sound. The explanations gave the opponents something to work with. Without the explanation, there was only the result. And a result, standing alone in the world as a fact rather than a proposition, is a much harder thing to dismantle than an argument that has been laid out piece by piece for evaluation. Let me show you how this plays out in your real life. You have drawn a boundary at work. A clear, reasonable, professionally appropriate boundary about what you will and will not take on. And a colleague pushes back. Not with a direct challenge, with a question. Why? Why that boundary? Why now? What changed? And you feel the pull. You feel the urge to lay out the full reasoning, the workload, the priorities, the personal circumstances, the professional rationale. You want them to understand. And so you start explaining. And the moment you start, you have turned a boundary into a proposition. A proposition can be debated. A proposition can be evaluated. A proposition invites the other person to weigh in on whether it is justified. Your boundary has just become a group decision. And a boundary that is subject to group evaluation is no longer a boundary. It is a request. The short acknowledgement, "This is how I have decided to handle my capacity right now," does not invite evaluation. It does not produce material for a debate. It sits in the room as a fact rather than a case being argued. And facts, my friend, are much harder to argue with than explanations. Because explanations ask for agreement. Facts simply exist. Comment. I owe no one my reasoning if that just changed how you think about the next conversation where someone pushes you to justify yourself. Trick 3. Walk away from the table before they realize you were the meal. This is the trick that is going to make some people uncomfortable, and I want you to stay with me through the discomfort because the discomfort is the part that means it is hitting the right place. There are dynamics in your life, professional and personal, where you are giving more than you are receiving. You know this. You have known it for a while. You have felt the imbalance in the way that certain conversations leave you emptier than when they started, in the way that certain relationships seem to run on your fuel while the other person coasts, in the way that certain professional arrangements keep asking you to bring more while offering the same amount in return, or less, or nothing at all, except the privilege of being included. Machiavelli studied this dynamic at the level of nations and alliances, and what he observed scales down to the personal level with uncomfortable precision. He documented that the alliances that were most exploitative were almost never the ones where the exploitation was visible from the outside. They were the ones where one party had gradually, incrementally, almost imperceptibly shifted the terms of the arrangement so far in their own favor that the other party had lost sight of where the original terms had been. The shift happened so slowly that it never triggered the alarm that a sudden change would have triggered. Each individual adjustment was small enough to seem reasonable, and by the time the accumulated effect of all those adjustments became visible, the disadvantaged party had been operating at a loss for so long that they had forgotten what operating at equity felt like. You have been in this dynamic. Maybe you are in it right now. The correction is not a confrontation. It is not a dramatic announcement that the terms have changed. It is something quieter and more powerful than any confrontation could produce. It is the decision made internally and executed through behavior rather than words to stop bringing more than the situation is returning. To match the other party's level of investment rather than exceeding it. To let the imbalance become visible by reducing your contribution to the level that theirs has been operating at all along. And when you do that, when the arrangement that has been running on your excess suddenly has to run on what both parties are actually bringing, one of two things will happen. Either the other party will increase their contribution to close the gap, which tells you the relationship is worth being in, or the arrangement will collapse under the weight of its own imbalance, which tells you it was never sustainable, and the only reason it lasted as long as it did was because you were subsidizing it with your own energy. Either outcome is an improvement over where you are now. Both of them produce clarity. And clarity, my friend, even when it is painful, is always better than the comfortable confusion of not quite knowing how badly the math is working against you. Let me give you a specific way to test this starting this week. Pick one relationship, professional or personal, where you suspect the balance is off, where you have a feeling, even if you have not articulated it clearly, that you are bringing significantly more to the table than you are receiving. For the next 2 weeks, match the other person's energy exactly. Do not exceed it. Do not compensate for it. Do not add the extra layer of effort that you usually add because adding it is your default. Simply match what they bring. If they reach out, respond with the same warmth and speed. If they do not reach out, do not reach out either. If they invest, invest equally. If they coast, coast equally. And at the end of 2 weeks, look at what the relationship looks like when both parties are contributing the same amount. That picture, that honest, unmanaged, unsubsidized picture, is the truth of the relationship. Everything before it was the version that your excess effort was constructing. And the version your excess effort was constructing was never the real thing. It was a project you were running alone and calling a partnership. Halfway through this video, I want to be direct with you. If what you have heard so far is making things visible that were not visible before, if these tricks are giving names to patterns you have been living inside without the language to describe them, then you need what comes next, more than what came before. Subscribe right now, not for the algorithm. For the version of you that is being built by this conversation, hit the notification bell and stay, because tricks 4 through 7 are where this goes from understanding to action. Trick 4. Remove your emotional investment before you remove your physical presence. Let me tell you why most people's exits do not work. Why they walk away from something and then feel pulled back. Why the decision to leave never quite sticks. Why the freedom they expected to feel on the other side of the departure never arrives the way they imagined it would. It is because they removed their body before they removed their heart. They left physically while remaining emotionally invested in the outcome, in the other person's response, in the question of whether the walking away would produce the result they were hoping it would produce. And as long as the emotional investment is still there, as long as some part of them is still watching to see what happens next, still hoping for a specific response, still measuring the success of the departure by what the other person does in its aftermath, they have not actually left. They have just changed their position while keeping their attention locked on the thing they were supposed to be walking away from. Machiavelli understood this about political exits with a precision that most political thinkers never achieved. He observed that the rulers who made the cleanest breaks, who disengaged from alliances and arrangements and relationships that were no longer serving them, were the rulers who had done the emotional work of disengagement before the physical act of disengagement occurred. They had arrived at the departure already settled, already clear, already complete in their understanding of why the leaving was necessary and what the leaving was going to cost and what the leaving was going to produce. They did not leave and then process. They processed and then left. And the difference between those two sequences is the difference between a departure that sticks and a departure that collapses back into the thing it was supposed to escape. Here is what this means for you in practical terms. Before you walk away from anything significant, a relationship, a professional arrangement, a dynamic that has been costing you, do the internal work first. Get clear on what you are leaving and why. Get honest with yourself about what you are hoping the leaving will produce, and then ask yourself whether that hope is a genuine expectation or a disguised version of the same chasing that got you into this dynamic in the first place. If you are leaving because you genuinely understand that staying is no longer worth the cost, you will feel settled in the decision. If you are leaving because you hope the leaving will produce a specific response from the other person, you have not actually decided to leave. You have decided to perform a departure and see what happens. And performances, as Machiavelli documented across hundreds of real political cases, are always eventually recognized for what they are. Let me give you a specific way to know which kind of departure you are making, because the difference is not always obvious from the inside. Ask yourself this: if the other person responded exactly the way you are hoping they will respond after you leave, if they chased, if they apologized, if they gave you everything you have been wanting, would you go back? If the answer is yes, you have not decided to leave. You have decided to make a move in a negotiation that is still ongoing. And moves in ongoing negotiations are not departures. They are tactics. And tactics get recognized eventually. And when they do, they stop working, and they damage the credibility of every future departure you attempt. If the answer is genuinely no, if the walking away is genuinely about you and your own needs and your own standards and has nothing to do with what it produces in the other person, then you are ready. Then the departure will stick. Then the silence that follows will feel like freedom, rather than like a test you are administering and waiting for someone to pass. Comment I leave complete if you understand the difference between those two kinds of departure and you know which one you need to start practicing. Trick 5. Never ask twice for something that should have been given freely the first time. My friend, this is the one that is going to cost the most to hear, and I need you to hear it anyway, because it is the trick that will save you the most energy over the next year of your life. You have been asking for things that should not have required asking. Respect that should have been extended without a conversation about it. Reciprocity that should have arrived without a request for it. Basic consideration in professional and personal dynamics that should have been present as a default rather than something you had to specifically, explicitly, sometimes repeatedly ask for. And here is the part that makes it worse. Every time you asked, the asking itself communicated something about the dynamic that the asking was supposed to correct. It communicated that the thing you were asking for was not being given naturally, that the other person's default state, when left undisturbed, did not include whatever you were requesting. that without your active management of the situation, the basic quality you needed from the relationship would simply not be present. And that communication, that visible evidence that you need to ask for what should be given, changes the perceived value of the thing when it finally arrives. It arrives as compliance rather than as genuine care, as a response to pressure rather than an expression of investment. And compliance that was produced by asking is never the same thing as behavior that was produced by caring. Machiavelli observed this dynamic in the relationships between rulers and their courts, and the principle he extracted from it has not aged a day in 500 years. He wrote about the difference between loyalty that is offered and loyalty that is extracted, and he was clear about which one holds under pressure. Loyalty that is offered, that arrives without being requested, that exists because the person giving it has decided independently and freely that this relationship is worth their genuine investment, is the only kind that can be relied upon when circumstances change. Loyalty that is extracted, that had to be asked for, requested, sometimes demanded, is loyalty that exists because the cost of not providing it was made clear, and it will evaporate the moment that cost calculation changes. The correction is hard. It requires you to stop asking for things that should be given, to let the absence of what you need stand visible and unaddressed, to allow the gap between what you deserve and what you are receiving to exist in the relationship without your management of it, and to let the other person's response to that unmanaged gap, whether they notice it and close it on their own or whether they do not, tell you everything you need to know about what you are actually dealing with and what you can realistically expect from here forward. Let me tell you what this looks like in real life, because I need you to see yourself in it. You are in a professional environment where you have been consistently producing excellent work, and you have had to ask multiple times for the recognition that the work deserved. You have had to point out your contribution in meetings because it was not being acknowledged on its own. You have had to remind people of the role you played in an outcome because the role was being attributed to someone else or simply forgotten. Each time you asked, a small piece of something inside you eroded, not because asking is shameful, because asking for what should have been given teaches you something about the environment you are in that you did not want to learn. It teaches you that your contribution is visible but not valued at the level that generates automatic recognition. And that is important information. Painful information, but important. Here is what Machiavelli would have said to you in that situation, and I believe he would have said it with genuine care because he was, despite his reputation, a man who cared deeply about helping capable people navigate environments that were not designed to serve them. He would have said, "Stop asking. Not because you do not deserve what you are asking for, because the asking is confirming to the room and to yourself that the room's default does not include what you need. And a room whose default does not include what you need is a room you should be evaluating rather than lobbying. The energy you are spending on the asking should be spent on the building the position, the alternatives, the relationships, and the internal clarity that will eventually place you in a room where what you need is offered rather than requested. Comment, "I stop asking for what should be freely given," if that just named a pattern you have been running without realizing how much it has been costing you. Trick 6. Let the absence teach what your presence could not. Before I get into this trick, let me say something important about what absence is and what it is not, because the distinction matters, and getting it wrong turns a powerful strategy into a childish game. Absence as a punishment is a game. Walking away to make someone feel bad, to generate anxiety, to manipulate a response through withdrawal. That is not what this trick is about, and it is not what Machiavelli was describing when he wrote about the strategic use of withdrawal. Absence as a natural consequence of redirected investment is something entirely different. It is what happens when you stop pouring your energy into a situation that is not producing a return and start investing that energy into things that are. The absence is not the point. The redirection is the point. The absence is simply what the other party experiences when the redirection occurs. Machiavelli documented that some of the most significant shifts in political dynamics he ever witnessed occurred not through confrontation, not through negotiation, not through the exchange of arguments or the application of pressure, but through the simple and sustained withdrawal of something that had previously been consistently available. The ally who stops showing up, the advisor who stops volunteering counsel, the supporter who stops extending the support that had been assumed. In each case, the withdrawal communicated something that words could not have communicated, because words invite debate and withdrawal invites reflection. The person who receives words can argue with them. The person who experiences absence can only sit with it. And sitting with it produces, in most people, a quality of self-examination that 100 conversations could never generate. Here is how you apply this. The next time you are in a dynamic where your words have not produced the change you need, where you have said the thing, made the case, expressed the concern, communicated the boundary, and the situation has not moved, stop talking. Not as a performance, as a genuine redirection of your energy towards something that actually produces a return. Let the absence of what you were providing do the teaching that your presence could not do. Because your presence, however valuable it is, becomes invisible when it is constant. And invisible things are not valued. They are assumed. But the absence of something that was assumed, that makes a sound the room cannot ignore. You do not need to announce the withdrawal. You do not need to explain it. You do not need to frame it or contextualize it or make sure the other person understands why it is happening. The absence speaks for itself. And it speaks in a language that the other person's own reflection provides the translation for, which means whatever conclusions they reach are conclusions they arrived at themselves. And conclusions people arrive at themselves are the only kind that genuinely change behavior. Let me tell you what this has looked like in the lives of people who have actually practiced it. Because the idea sounds clean and the execution is messy. And I want you to know that the messiness is normal and expected and does not mean you are doing it wrong. You redirect your energy. You invest in yourself, in your work, in the relationships that actually return what you give. And for the first few days, the absence feels like loss. It feels like you are losing something by not being present where you used to be present. That feeling is real. Honor it. But do not let it run your behavior. Because what is happening beneath the feeling, what is happening in the mind of the person experiencing your absence, is something you cannot see and something that words could never have produced. They are sitting with the gap. They are measuring the shape of what is missing. They are arriving at their own pace and through their own reflection at an understanding of what you were actually providing all along. And that understanding, because it was arrived at internally rather than delivered externally, has a quality of truth to it that your most eloquent explanation could never have matched. Comment, "I let absence speak," if you have been saying too much in situations where silence would have done more. Trick 7. The person who walks away holding nothing is the person who loses nothing. This is the last trick, and it is the one that everything else has been building toward. So I need you here. I need you focused. Because this is the one that, if you genuinely absorb it, will change the way you walk into every significant room and every significant relationship for the rest of your life. Machiavelli spent his career documenting what happens when people's needs become visible to the people around them. He watched need get converted into leverage, with a consistency that would be depressing if it were not so useful to understand. Every single time a man needed something from someone, their approval, their continued support, their cooperation, their forgiveness, their attention, and that need became visible, the dynamic shifted. The person who held what was needed gained power. The person who needed it lost power. Not because either of them had changed, because the need created an imbalance that could not be corrected by anything other than the reduction of the need itself. You have felt this. Think about the last time you walked into a conversation needing a specific outcome, needing them to understand, needing them to agree, needing them to come back, needing them to see you the way you need to be seen. Feel what that need did to you inside the conversation. How it made you careful in the wrong ways. How it made you accommodating in ways that cost you your position. How it made you accept things you would not have accepted if the need had not been so loud. The need was running the conversation, not you. And the other person could feel it, could feel the specific quality of reaching that need produces in someone, even if they could not have named what they were feeling. They just knew that the dynamic felt a certain way. And the way it felt gave them permission to give less than they should have given, because the need told them they could. Here is the deepest correction in this entire video. Build a version of yourself that walks into every significant interaction holding nothing that cannot be set down. Not indifferent, you will still care. Not detached, you will still be present, still invested, still warm. But free. Free from the specific dependency on this particular outcome, this particular person's response, this particular room's assessment. Free because you have built your sense of your own worth on something that the room did not construct and the room cannot dismantle. Free because you have genuine alternatives, genuine internal resources, genuine relationships and investments and sources of meaning that make this particular thing one part of a full life rather than the single pillar that the whole structure rests on. Machiavelli called this virtue. The quality that allows you to meet fortune, whatever the moment brings, however it arrives, whether it is favorable or devastating, without losing yourself in the response. It is not something you are born with. It is something you build. Through every decision to stop chasing what does not chase back. Through every decision to stop explaining to people who have already decided. Through every decision to walk away from something that is costing more than it is returning. Through every small, daily, unglamorous act of treating yourself with the seriousness and the selectivity that you have been extending to everyone else. Let me give you a practical starting point for building this, because virtue sounds grand, but it is built in the smallest daily decisions. Tomorrow, when you walk into the first significant interaction of your day, check your internal state before you engage. Ask yourself, what do I need from this? If the answer is nothing, if you can genuinely say that you are walking into this interaction complete, that the outcome is something you want rather than something you need, that your sense of yourself will remain intact regardless of what happens in the next 30 minutes, then you are ready. If the answer is something specific, if you realize that your emotional equilibrium for the rest of the day depends on how this interaction goes, then you know the work that needs to be done before the interaction begins. And the work is not about preparing a better argument or a stronger position. The work is about locating your sense of your own worth somewhere that this particular interaction cannot reach and cannot damage. That is the daily practice. That is what Machiavelli meant by virtue. And it is available to you right now, in this moment, as a choice about where you locate the thing that matters most about who you are. My friend, comment "I hold nothing the room can take" if that sentence just described the version of yourself you are building toward. Every one of these 7 tricks points to the same truth that Machiavelli spent his life trying to make visible to anyone who was willing to see it. The world does not give you what you deserve. The world gives you what you negotiate for. And negotiation, at its core, is not about leverage or strategy or the clever deployment of psychological moves. It is about who you are when you walk through the door. The person who walks through the door chasing gets chased from. The person who walks through the door explaining gets judged. The person who walks through the door needing gets managed. And the person who walks through the door complete, settled, whole, free from the specific dependencies that turn every room into an audition rather than a presence, gets the best of what the room has to offer. Not because they demanded it, because the room can feel that they do not need it. And what is not needed is always valued differently from what is pursued. Before I close this out, let me say something directly to you. Not to the audience, to you specifically. The person who watched all 7 tricks and felt something shift. The person who recognized their own patterns in at least 3 of these and is sitting right now with the uncomfortable awareness of how long those patterns have been operating and how much they have cost. I need you to know that the recognition is not the end of anything. It is the beginning. The patterns did not install themselves overnight, and they will not uninstall overnight. They will show up tomorrow. They will show up in the conversation you are dreading, and in the relationship you are trying to figure out, and in the professional dynamic you have been navigating without quite understanding why it keeps going the way it goes. And when they show up, you will have a choice. The old choice: chase, explain, stay, subsidize, ask, hope, pour more into the gap, and pray that this time the gap closes. Or the new choice, the one this video just made available: walk away, not from everything, from the specific things that are not returning what you are investing, from the specific explanations that are opening doors you should be closing, from the specific dependencies that are handing other people a handle on your peace. That is the work, and it starts now, not later. Now. You know this now. You know why the chasing has been producing what it has been producing. You know why the explaining has been opening doors you should have been closing. You know why the staying too long has been costing more than the walking away ever could. And you know what the alternative looks like. The settled, deliberate, quietly powerful alternative of the person who has finally decided that their attention and their energy and their presence are worth more than the discount they have been offering on them. That is who you are building now. Not overnight, not perfectly, but in the right direction, starting with this video and continuing through every decision you make from here forward about what you chase, what you explain, and what you walk away from without looking back. That is who you are building. Not overnight. Not through a single moment of resolve that fades by Wednesday. Through the daily, unglamorous, genuinely difficult practice of catching the old pattern before it fires and choosing the new one instead. Every time you make that choice, the new pattern gets stronger. Every time you make it, the old one loosens its grip by 1 more degree. And eventually, not all at once, but with the kind of gradual certainty that real change always carries, you arrive at the version of yourself that does not chase, does not explain, and does not stay in rooms that were never built to hold what you are actually worth. Like this video, if any part of it gave you the words for something that has been costing you without a name, share it with someone you know who is still chasing something that stopped being worth the effort a long time ago. They need to hear this. And subscribe to this channel, because the next video goes deeper into the specific daily moments where these tricks apply most directly, and how to recognize those moments before the old pattern kicks in and the chasing starts again.